Satisfy your sweet and salty cravings at the Hy-Vee Snack Sale this Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Featuring Hy-Vee potato chips, 98 cents. Coca-Cola 6-packs, $2.98 each when you buy 4. Little Debbie snacks in a family pack, just $1.48 each. Get these hot deals and so much more during the Hy-Vee Snack Sale this Friday, Saturday, and Sunday only at Hy-Vee.
You're listening to a CNA podcast.
Hello, climate listeners. So as you can tell, I'm certainly not Julie Yu. My name is Crispina Robert, and I oversee podcasts here at CNA. Our usual host, Julie, is in the thick of all the reporting action covering COP28 in Dubai, together with CNA's climate correspondent, Jack Board. They've been on their feet in what has been an incredible few days, so I'm jumping in to check in on them. We're recording this on Wednesday, December 30, in just a few hours after a new climate deal was announced. So I'm going to get their take. Was it a good COP or a bad one? What was the exact phrasing in the final agreement when it came to energy transition? What else were the highlights? It must be quite strange, but welcome to the pod, Julie.
Oh, thanks for having me, Crispy.
And hi, Jack.
Hi, Crispy. How you doing?
All right, let's get right into it. As with other years, there's all this drama to the final agreement. A new deal has been announced. To cheers, from what I've read, for the first time, it calls on countries to move away from fossil fuels, but not to phase out, in quote unquote. First, give us a reaction to what happened and explain to us a little bit more about the significance of this.
I think it depends on who you ask. Very much mixed reactions. I think, as you mentioned there, a lot of relief in the plenary room as this was announced, a standing applause that lasted 1 whole minute. So I think that gives you a sense of just how difficult this process has been, and at least there is something. There is a success that the UAE presidency can stand up there and say, we delivered an agreement. The UAE consensus is what Sultan Al Jaber is calling it. But outside of the rooms, and actually inside the room as well, it was clear that there was still a lot of division, a lot of people unhappy with the final text. There was a sense that maybe this was rushed through at the last minute without all nations and parties being able to give their final inputs. So I think that was quite interesting. And certainly from activists, from scientists, we've already seen that they're not happy with the extent to which fossil fuels in particular have been included in the text, although that is a historic thing for the first time in nearly 30 years that fossil fuels are mentioned, to the extent to which producers will need to roll down the use of or phase down those industries. Yeah, there's not many details around that yet.
Exactly like what Jack said. It was a roller coaster at COP28, to say the least. I mean, the whole phase-out drama had us on the edge of our seats. The initial disappointment and shock were palpable when that phase-out was sort of phased out from the draft on Monday, and negotiations and uncertainty for a day or so. Then the text got a green light this morning. And what I found quite interesting was the way COP28 President Al Jaber announced that global stocktake deal at the plenary session, because it caught some of us by surprise in the blink of an eye, and you would have just missed the swift adoption without any objection. In fact, Samoa's lead negotiator says the alliance of small island states were not even in the room when the text was announced as being agreed to. So country speeches only followed after. The gavel was then down and it was done deal. Left a few of us sort of scratching our heads, of course, but as for the reaction, certainly mixed, as Jack just mentioned.
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether it's the compromise. What do you guys think? In a way, fossil fuels is in the agreement, but at the same time, it gives all producers a chance to continue doing what they do. That's a cynical view, right?
I think you're allowed to be cynical about this process. Many people are, even the ones who are involved deeply in the negotiations. I think at the end of this, it is a compromise. Of course, the system requires consensus. So you need nearly 200 countries to agree on single words, single sentences. That's pretty difficult given all the different priorities, vested interests, impacts of climate change to various economies and people. So there is definitely talk around changing the voting rules at COP Former US Vice President Al Gore has raised this idea of a supermajority instead of having consensus to kind of dilute the power of certain countries. One country can block the entire thing and hold the negotiations hostage. So the fossil fuel producers have been doing that here, and they've done it in the past. And I think at the end of this, countries like the US, India, China, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE itself will walk away satisfied that the text does not compel them to change their respective courses around polluting industries going forward.
So let's get to the man at the top, Dr. Sultan Al Jaber. Even before COP28 began, there was quite a bit of controversy about him leading climate negotiations, especially given he's the CEO of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. In fact, I've heard someone describe his appointment as a mosquito leading the fight against malaria. But others have said, hey, who better than someone with skin in the game? And he promised to make this inclusive as well. What's been the general sentiment about him in general and how he's done?
I think initially opinions about him were pretty mixed on the ground. There was obviously that evident skepticism stemming from concerns about that potential conflict of interest due to his dual roles. But then there were also the sense of optimism that his presidency could galvanize or encourage more decisive climate action within the oil and gas sector. But in the subsequent controversies, such as the leaked documents revealing plans by the UAE to use climate meetings to promote ADNOC, or that no science behind a phase out fossil fuels comment, were incredibly ill timed for Dr. Al Jaber, I feel, who is the key figure meant to reassure others about his commitment to delivering at COP28. And these incidents were pretty damaging, especially his interaction with Ireland's former president, Mary Robinson, during that online event. I mean, it sounded like he was clearly in a bad mood, right? And I'm sure he had no idea that it would blow up that way. What do you think, Chad?
Yeah, the Sultan has been under a lot of pressure, a lot of criticism directed his way. And I think he must have known that would be the case when he put his hand up for this job. He can't escape his ties to one of the most influential oil companies in the region that clearly has vested interests in ensuring that oil production continues and the fossil fuel industries have a viable future. Having said that, he has been able to deliver something that he can say is historic. He's got fossil fuels in the text for the first time. Whether it's enough, whether it has an impact on the industries going forward, we don't know yet. But he will stand by that record, and I think many will view that as a success.
Personally, what was quite remarkable about him, and not only his sharp beard, but how he has that neck for tackling these controversies head on. I thought that was quite remarkable, whether through impromptu press conferences or staunchly rebutting accusations. For example, when he faced that backlash over his no science remarks, he just promptly arranged a press conference to clarify his position on climate change, reasserted his commitment to scientific principles, and so on. He doesn't avoid engaging with critics, although I think that No Science Saga did change the mood of the COP, which had started really well.
He had a strong start, right? The announcement of billions in seed funding for vulnerable countries is one big tick off the list, the climate finance one. We know that amounts of cash needed to transition and to mitigate is quite significant. So, was this good news?
I think it was significant, and it definitely was a momentum giver to the early days of the conference. This issue of loss and damage has been fraught for many years. We had a breakthrough at COP27 in Egypt where they decided that there would be a fund, but actually operationalizing it has been something that's taken more than a year. And to be able to deliver that in the early days, I think was a really good sign for the rest of COP. I think we are over $700 million into that fund at the moment. Many countries have already pledged. Still a lot of details that need to be worked out. Who will receive the money? In what form will they receive it? Will it be grants? Will it be loans? Who will be eligible? We know the World Bank will be taking charge of this scheme, and also where the money will continue to come from. This 700 million is just a tiny fraction of what's needed to settle loss and damage, which obviously is the money that is paid to countries who are exposed to the risks of climate change but didn't cause it. So the money's meant to be replenished every 4 years. Who's going to be doing that? And where are the rest of the billions? Good start, but a lot more to do in that space. And representatives from those countries who we've spoken to have definitely been echoing that they know it's a good step, but a long way from actually receiving money, which will make a difference on the ground.
Yep. Julie, anything to add to that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Money was the talk of the town at COP28, and everyone was buzzing about the pledges governments and businesses were making, both in the main negotiations and also on the sidelines. It was pretty hard to keep track of all the numbers that are being flown
Yep.
around. But what was impressive for me is that this COP has broken some finance records, especially the Green Climate Fund, for instance, that hit a new high with pledges totaling $12.8 billion. But like Jack said, creating the fund is a win, no doubt about that. But the big question is, do we have enough cash in the fund? Will the support keep flowing to tackle the havoc caused by climate change?
Okay, let's come back to this whole thing about the phase out working into the final agreement. It's replete with difficulties, not just the oil producers, because it hits them directly. But what about the role of the other players, China and India, for example? I read that the Chinese were softening, but there are some twists and turns. Saudi Arabia was a big player in this whole thing. Was there an expectation at some point that this would go south?
Yeah, stonewalling progress were, like you mentioned, major oil producing countries, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Russia. They're very vocal from the beginning about their worries regarding the potential hit to their economies if there's any mention of phasing out of fossil fuels. It's quite understandable because these heavyweights collectively control a whopping 80% of the world's oil reserves. They're a third of the daily oil production worldwide. For them, any hint of moving away from these fossil fuels is a direct blow to the core of their economy. So it definitely in the pushing for stronger language regarding the fossil fuels and also maneuvering through the negotiations, proving quite an uphill battle for both sides, really. And I think that's why some are considering the latest deal as no small feat, because have been wrangling with heavyweights like Saudi Arabia, which is scrubbing any mention of fossil fuels. Russia have been pulling strings behind the scenes to throw a wrench in the works. So, and I guess the question is, what's up their sleeves for next year's COP? And Baku, Azerbaijan, another country that's rich in oil and gas.
Yeah, I would say there weren't expectations that it would go south, but there were definitely fears that in the end it would just simply be unworkable. We're already 24 hours overtime at this COP, but it would have certainly been a bitter blow to the UAE's credibility as president of this COP if there was simply no mention of fossil fuels. I think that would have been unsustainable. It would have thrown doubts over this whole multilateral process. And as Julie said, this debate is definitely not going away. Next COP is going to be in Azerbaijan. We'll follow the criticism that fossil fuel producing nations should not be setting the climate agenda, as the Baku government will do when it takes over from the UAE, a country whose foreign exports are 95% composed of natural gas and oil. They're going to find themselves wedged within this political and ideological debate, ripe for criticism from some and into the embrace of others.
But I can understand that on one hand, we think that it's narrow, selfish interests. But the truth of the matter is we all depend on it, right? It's just not practical to pivot away so quickly. There's this whole existential angst. So maybe it's just a transition period. But do you think that there can be something much more bold in terms of the action?
I disagree with the notion that we can't transition away quickly. I think technology is very advanced in the renewable space. There are a raft of solutions out there to accelerate climate action. It doesn't matter if we're using oil resources if the planet is falling apart. And if we want to keep this 1.5 degree temperature rise in sight, unlike what the Sultan might have said, the science is dictating that we have to have a fast transition away from using fossil fuels.
Are you looking for ways to make your money work harder? Tips on saving, investing, or retiring early, perhaps? Or advice on big-ticket decisions like buying a house or owning a car? I'm Andrea Heng, host of CNA's top personal finance podcast, Money Talks. And these are some of the things we find out for you. Each week, I get a guest to share personal stories and answer burning questions that help you make sense of the latest financial trends. Go check out the complete Money Talks playlist on the CNA app, Spotify, Google, or Apple Podcasts.
Another thing that I just quickly want to get your take is that I was reading that there were more than 2,000 fossil fuel lobby groups in Dubai too. Is that unusual?
Their turnout at COP28 was off the
Off
charts.
the charts,
I think.
right? Yeah.
I have this group called Kick Big Polluters
Yes.
Out. Awesome name, right? They say that numbers have shot up big time. At COP26, there are some 500 of them. And then a year later at COP27 in Egypt, it jumped to, 636 or something. And this year in Dubai, as you said, 2,456. So that's quite a jump. And
Yeah.
apparently, it's more than 10 most climate vulnerable nations combined. So, it's really underscoring how the industry presence is dwarfing that of those on the front lines of the crisis. And many have noticed this surge. Public officials, UN groups, loads of the civil society organizations have been speaking up, saying we need to kick these polluters out of the talks. I think it was Amnesty International who came out and said that arms dealers are not invited to peace talks. Why should climate wreckers be at the climate summit?
That's a good quote, though.
Yeah, I think, and another interesting stat from that report was that the lobbyists that are pushing these oil and gas interests outnumber Indigenous representatives by
Yeah.
7-1.
Wow.
So, okay, both groups have something at stake, but that does seem like a power imbalance
Yes.
when it comes to gaining consensus on these issues.
So going back to your point about perhaps rethinking how these things are decided in the first place. Okay, let's pivot a little bit now to the Singapore Pavilion. I saw quite a lot of pictures. Julie, your Instagram posts were wonderful. And the pavilion looks
Thank you.
fabulous, so impressive. But one thing that struck me though, when I was following some of the folks who were there, and it struck me that actually, in a way, the COP is now also kind of an avenue for countries to do business deals, to sign MOUs. It's that part of the equation has become a little bit more important. What do you guys think?
Oh, absolutely. I think COP28 was this really incredible sort of mismatch of experiences. Let's say I'm on my way to the interview a guest, and bam, you spot Al Gore and Mark Carney strolling by with their delegation, and you turn the corner and
Yeah.
you see Stella McCartney, the fashion designer, chatting about sustainable fashion, and then you catch South African chef cooking up a storm, talking about sustainable food and so on. And of course, indigenous activists with their stunning traditional outfits dancing away. So everywhere you look, I think there's something intriguing to witness and absorb. And the people you bump into had some fascinating stories to tell as well. Jack and I, we were strolling around and found this pollution pods, total eye opener. These pods replicated the air quality of cities like Beijing, London, and New Delhi. We had fun, but yeah, we couldn't wait to get out of there. So observing this sort of massive congregation of people, all with should have shared goal of ramping up climate solutions and actions, I personally found it very heartening. And I think those are the real magnets pulling participants into COP28.
It's more than just the major agreement now, right, Jack? It's also the networking. It's almost like a Davos.
Yeah, it feels like Climate Expo basically now. This is just an incredibly enormous event. And I actually wonder if this is peak COP. 100,000 delegates through the blue zone.
Oh,
that,
wow.
That feels unsustainably large.
Yes.
I wonder where it goes in the years to come. If we look at Egypt, there were about 40,000 or around
Yes.
45,000. If we
Right.
look just back 5 or 6 years to Germany, COP23, only 11,000. So this has grown and warped. And speaking to people, I think they do find it very useful. The people in the science world, the businesses, the tech companies, it's a great chance for them to network and, as you said, share information and solutions. But at times it does feel like that the actual negotiations themselves are just a little bit of an afterthought.
That's the vibe I was getting. I was reading 70,000. You're saying 100 like an
Yeah,
expo.
I think it hit 100,000 this time.
Wow. Okay. Maybe because it's Dubai too. Okay. Maybe that. Okay. Finally, I don't want to keep you guys. I know you must have had a terribly long day. Perhaps both of you can list down what you think was your top wins for this COP. I mean, you've covered a couple of COPs now. So maybe your top wins and your biggest disappointment.
I guess the removal of that phase out language hit hard.
Oh yeah.
Seeing it drop last minute from the deal was a major letdown.
Mm.
And now with the agreement, sort of that vague commitment to reduce both consumption and production by 2050, which leaves a lot to be desired. I'm hoping to leave COP in a hopeful note, though.
Yeah.
So if I were to share a major win, I would say the commitment from countries to triple global renewable energy capacity by 2030. I understand that Singapore and several other ASEAN nations are on board too, and also had a chance to actually cover solar energy a few days ago here in Dubai. I had access to this world's biggest concentrated solar power project just like 50 kilometers from Dubai. It's part of their plan to go fully clean energy by 2050, and just the sight of millions of solar panels basking in the sun, powering hundreds of thousands of homes while slashing million tons of carbon emissions annually was quite mind blowing. So being there gave me hope. And we know that solar energy is getting cheaper, tech is getting better. Folks are gung ho about cleaner energy. So fingers crossed that they keep pushing in the right direction.
Jack, what about you?
For me, I think the best win and the biggest disappointment probably in the same space. I think getting loss and damage off the ground was a big win. And I think it gave a lot of optimism to the countries around Southeast Asia, the countries I do a lot of my reporting, the frontline communities that in the near future, the money that they so badly need for climate adaptation will be not too far around the corner. So I just think we can't forget that the vulnerable people in the world, and there are so many of them, really rely on these processes and the finances getting flowing. Although we spoke about earlier it being a small step, I just think that was a really positive way to kick off the COP, and hopefully over the next few years it really can make a difference. And then disappointment wise, I just think that the amount of money that went into loss and damage was so small. The United States has really been a laggard in this space for many years. They got their big win by putting the scheme under the World Bank, which they have a lot of influence over, yet only put in about $20 million. $20 million for an economy the size of the US into this fund, I think that's a big lose. And hopefully we see more signs that countries are serious about their obligations to this fund and to the countries that are really bearing the brunt of climate change, which, again, I repeat, they didn't cause.
Okay, thanks guys. Thanks for dialing in and putting up with all my tech problems. Thanks to our hardworking crew in Dubai. We wish both of you a safe flight home. And thanks for listening to the Climate Conversations. The CNA podcast team is on a season break this December, but we'll be back in January with more content. So do write to us. We are on all the major podcast platforms. Thanks, Jack. Thanks, Julie.
Bye.
See you soon.